Could Canada join the EU? I don't know. Moin. Hello. Welcome back to the channel. My name's Mace, coming to you from Canada. And isn't it crazy? Like, these are the headlines we're seeing. These are the types of ideas that are being floated. And Trump has only been in office for a few months. And this is the trajectory that we're on. Like, just the way that things are heading. And listen, there's a big distance. There's a big, beautiful ocean. There's a large amount of space in between Canada and the EU. There would take a lot. It would take a lot of logistical and just a lot of negotiation and cooperation to make something like Canada join the EU work. I don't know what exactly that looks like. I can say that I would certainly love to have European products available for trade. Like, I think European products on Canadian shelves would be amazing. European products are higher quality, better regulated and safer in a lot of cases. So let's hop into this, see what this video is all about and their reasoning. I do think, like, with Trump's posturing and Trump's targeting of Canada, it's a good opportunity for Canada, for my country, to start defending itself, start negotiating for what it's worth, because Canada's a resource-rich country. We're democratic, loving country. Smaller population right now, having around 40 million. And yeah, we do need more people. But we don't want to just put our space and resources on a platter for other countries as well. So Canada has to be smart, fair, firm, but open as well to other countries, other ideas, especially if the United States is going to be just abandoning pretty much many, many countries in terms of the trade deals that have existed in the past and just being an ally in general. The U.S. cannot be trusted to deal in anything fairly, because they want to browbeat and bully all of these countries around the world into submission with these tariffs. Now, it's a pretty big gamble by Trump. It's a pretty big gamble. He's either going to get a recession or he's going to get some concessions and maybe potentially improve some revenues, because the U.S. is in a heck of a lot of debt. I'm going to tell you that much right now. So he really needs a win. It could go really bad for him. He's taking a big gamble with this tariff war. And tariffs don't, in principle, not work, but they can backfire and they can cause a lot of issues, especially if other countries just say, well, screw you, we're going to find alternatives, right? Instead of bowing to the US and giving them concessions in these negotiations. All right, let's check this out.
Canada should join the EU. At the time, the piece was widely ridiculed and touted as proof of The Economist's declining quality and credibility. However, a couple of months on, and the article no longer looks quite so ridiculous. In fact, it looks sort of prescient. As Trump's threats of tariffs and annexation against America's northern neighbour have escalated, Canadians have apparently started looking to the EU as a backup bestie, and a poll conducted by Abacus Data in late February found that an astonishing 44% plurality of Canadians thought Canada should join the EU, compared to just 34% who thought Canada shouldn't. To be fair, Canada and the EU are already pretty chummy. Canada has a free trade agreement with the EU. It's an observer state in the Council of Europe, and it's a founding member of NATO, which has long been the foundation of Europe's security. On top of this, Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, who now looks likely to win the next election, went to France for his first foreign trip, where he described Canada as, quote, the most European of non-European countries, and argued that Canada and Europe are strong.
The only scary part, especially with Trump as president, is that the Americans are not going to be happy with Canada. And look, don't get me wrong, the Americans, it's of their own doing, this alienation of other countries, especially their closest neighbor and ally. But the scary part is the Americans having a neighbor, and not being on good terms. Like, listen, I want to be on good terms with the States, ideally, but it's a hard one right now, right? So
Stronger together. So in this video, we thought we'd take a look at whether Canada could actually become the 28th member state of the European Union.
I don't think it'll ever happen, to be honest.
Never miss a major news story by listening to the Daily Podcast app. This question is no. Canada won't be joining the EU anytime soon.
Yeah.
Now, you might think that this is simply down to geography. After all, Article 49 of the EU's founding treaty states that only European states can apply for membership. And Canada isn't obviously European. But we don't think this is actually disqualifying. For starters, Article 49 doesn't define what it means by European, and this is obviously a contested concept. The EU's predecessor, the European Community, tried to answer this question more precisely in a 1992 document titled Europe and the Challenge of Enlargement. But they basically concluded that a
Trump and the Challenge of Enlargement.
strict definition was impossible, admitting that the term European, quote, combines geographical, historical and cultural elements, and that it is neither possible nor opportune to establish now the frontiers of the European Union, whose contours will be shaped over many years to come.
Yeah.
Culturally, Canada has pretty European vibes. It's a European-style social democracy, with a well-developed welfare state and deep historical links to both France and the UK. The geographical definition of Europe is also clearly elastic. After all, Cyprus is geographically closer to West Asia than continental Europe, and Malta is geographically closer to North Africa. Turkey is also generally considered a mostly West Asian country, but it's nonetheless an official EU candidate country, and Algeria, which is obviously in Africa, not Europe, was included in the European Economic Community until its independence from France in 1962. It's also true to say that Canada shares a close sea border with the EU via Saint-Pierre-et-Miquelon, a French territory off the coast of Newfoundland, and a land border with the territory of an EU member state via Greenland, although we should say that Greenland isn't actually part of the EU. Canada and Denmark actually used to have a hilariously amicable border dispute over a tiny island called Hans Island, which sits in between the Canadian territory of Nunavut and northern Greenland. In 1984, Canadian soldiers briefly visited the island, leaving a Canadian flag and a bottle of Canadian whiskey. Later that year, Danish officials responded by replacing the Canadian flag with a Danish flag and the whiskey with a bottle of Danish schnapps. The two countries continued this dance, known as the Whiskey War, for 40 years, intermittently exchanging their national flags and boozes. This lasted until 2022, when, in the aftermath of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, they divided the island in two, intended as a symbolic proof that border disputes can be resolved peacefully. Nonetheless, even if Article 49 doesn't necessarily...
Yeah, it's just symbolic, but it's not necessarily an apt analogy for Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Yeah, it's all interesting stuff. I'm interested to see your guys' comments too, so make sure to talk amongst yourselves in the comment section. Like you said at the beginning, like, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. I think Canada is resource rich and a very, very fair country to try to deal with. But like I said, fair, right, in negotiating. So it's just unfortunate with the current climate with the U.S. and their president and what's happening with Trump's gamble, I'm going to call it, with his tariff war around the world, because it's not just Canada, right? There's a lot of other countries that he's applying these tariffs to, which is going to affect a lot of stuff. And his end goal is to get better bargaining, I think, right? This is his business so-called acumen is what he would call it, I would think, even though he's really good at bankrupting casinos. Let's see if he can bankrupt the country.
Necessarily prohibit Canada from joining, it's still not going to happen, for the same reason that even well-established candidate countries are struggling to get into the bloc at the moment. Accession requires unanimity amongst other member states, which is hard to imagine, and much of the EU is currently suffering from what's known as enlargement fatigue. In other words, the EU has spent
enlargement fatigue. That's just funny.
All of its political energy in recent years bringing new countries into the bloc, But there's now a sense that A, the EU currently needs to focus on other stuff like guaranteeing Ukraine's security without American support, and B, the EU needs reform before it brings other members into the bloc. It's already difficult to achieve unanimity amongst current member states. Hungary is constantly vetoing, and lots of countries think the EU either needs to slim down or reform its voting rules to become more geopolitically agile. Nonetheless, we think there's one big caveat here, and that is that you could imagine Canada joining the outer tier of some sort of multi-speed EU. This idea of a multi-speed EU with different tiers of membership has been around for a while, and French President Emmanuel Macron was actually pushing for the idea of a 4-tier Europe in late 2023 to deal with the EU's ongoing institutional problems. After all, if obstructionist members like Hungary were in some sort of outer tier, they could haggle over less central issues, while a better integrated European core could get on with things. Anyway, Macron's idea sort of died off, largely because substantial reform to the EU's institutional arrangement would require treaty change, which would in turn require unanimity. And it's hard to see every member state agreeing to this plan if they know they might end up with less influence in a tiered Europe than they have at the moment. However, there are reasons to think a tiered Europe might be on the way.
And there's a lot of anti-EU sentiment, like, you know, you've heard the arguments. They're unelected officials, and this had a lot to do with Brexit, obviously. And Brexit was kind of an interesting period of time, and there's definitely a lot of parallels to Trump's rise and the sort of this voting bloc, this contrarian kind of anti-establishment, Trump getting the presidency in the U.S., Brexit happening, the referendum, and in the UK it was like 1 or 2%, right? Like it was
largely because the EU is increasingly
really close.
On joint
the Leave
borrowing,
crowd, the Brexit
debt
crowd.
issued at the EU level. This first happened during COVID, and the EU already owes some 300 billion euros to creditors, but it's been restarted to aid Europe's rearmament. This is essentially because few European countries have the fiscal space to afford steep increases in defence spending without politically difficult cuts elsewhere, and the EU can borrow at pretty cheap rates. The reason we think this could lead to a tiered Europe is that this money will eventually need to be paid back, presumably via direct taxes levied by the EU. Given it's hard to imagine member states agreeing to an enormous increase in national contributions, and giving Brussels the right to tax is probably the only way to maintain the EU's exceptional credit rating. This will probably create a core of countries who are happy to join in a European fiscal union, and an outer shell who aren't, and who would then be excluded from future joint borrowing initiatives. Canada might qualify for this outer core, and well, this could be a pretty good deal. After all, Canada is a big, empty, mineral-rich country, while Europe is densely populated and mineral-poor. At TLDR News, we're always trying to help you learn more about the world around you. Luckily for us, our sponsor this week, Brilliant, really up there, Math 4, data skill.
All right. So yeah, not much concrete ideas within the video. It's kind of floating the idea, I would say, more so. But Canada's certainly going to be looking... Whoa, what the hell did I do? Canada's certainly going to be looking for new partners, especially if we don't get
for this outer
it figured out with Mr. Trump. We'll see. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. All right, let me know what you guys think down below. Talk amongst yourselves. Tschüss, auf Wiedersehen.